All right, guys, now we're going to start our last unit on the Progressive Era with the beginnings of the Second Industrial Revolution. And there were a lot of things that supported the idea of industrial growth. The fact that we've expanded west put things like coal, iron, lead, copper, lumber within reach of the major cities. You also have the government assistance with the land grants and subsidies. But two big industries that really helped spur this growth were steel and oil. And in the 1850s, this man, Henry Bessemer, develops the Bessemer process, which makes steel stronger and cheaper. And steel will replace iron as the leading ways to manufacture things. Pittsburgh becomes the major producer of steel because of its proximity to mines and transportation. You also have Edwin Drake, who strikes oil in 1859 in Pennsylvania, which will be used for lubricating machines, developing kerosene as a cheap lighting source, and then eventually, of course, gasoline for automobiles. We talked briefly about the railroad boom during the period of expansion west, but you also have things like consolidation when companies were limiting competition by buying up smaller railroads, fixing prices at high levels into pools, and that's sort of what gave birth to the populist movement in the West, which we had talked about in the last unit. But it also helped spur the growth of industry with people like Fred Harvey, who had found the Harvey House hotels and restaurants. And these were sort of the first drive-through restaurants, if you will. You got off the train, you had a place to stay, to get a good meal, and you didn't have to go far into town. He also gave jobs to women, much like Frances Cabot Lowell, with hiring of the Harvey girls, almost exclusively women, to work in his restaurants. George Pullman also developed Pullman dining and Pullman sleeping cars, which made transportation on trains much more comfortable and added a sense of luxury to those that could afford to travel in this way. And that really helped spur the growth of industry because as people could travel into cities and travel west, railroads started to explode even further. You also have inventors that helped bring this about. Between 1860 and 1890, 400,000 patents were granted in the United States, with probably the most important person developing them, Thomas Edison, who had more than 1,000 patents in his life for things like the phonograph, the movie projector, and of course the cotton thread filament for the incandescent light bulb. And Edison was known as the Wizard of Menlo Park for his factory in Menlo Park, New Jersey. You have people like Cyrus Field, who would lay the first transatlantic cable to allow communication across the seas. And of course Alexander Graham Bell with the development of the telephone for the first time in 1876, which allowed for long-distance communication verbally without the use of Morse code. And he would organize his Bell telephone companies into eventually American Telephone and Telegraph, which we know today as simply AT&T. You also have other devices for things like the home and office that would change the way Americans lived and worked. In 1868, you have Christopher Sholes, who will invent the first truly modern typewriter. It had been around for the idea of movable type for a while, but no one had really found a way to make it an efficient process for producing paper documents until Christopher Sholes comes along. And so with his typewriter, now Americans and the idea of typing the written word becomes much, much more efficient than having to move the letters by hand before you put it on a printing press. You also have George Eastman, who changed the way photography is done by inventing a small, lightweight camera without having the mess of having to have the whole tripod and the flash powder and everything like that. And this right here is the Kodak camera that he invented, organized it into the Eastman Kodak Company, which we know today just simply as Kodak. You also have Henry Ford, of course, most known for the Ford Motor Company and the development of the Model T, but it's really the movable assembly line that makes for the efficient production of automobiles. And finally, in 1903, the Wright brothers take to the air in the first powered flight in the entire history of the world, totally revolutionizing the way the world would travel and communicate and really live their lives. Thanks, guys, for paying attention. Hopefully we took good notes.